A very pleasant good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Magandang umaga po, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon, at magandang gabi. Greeting all of you wherever you're located and whatever your time zone is. This is a day where we really have to take stock of many things that has happened in the past, and of course, because of that, assessing what is in front of us now in the present. And from there, we could look in the horizon for a brighter or a better or a more pleasant future. But that's the way things go. Our program now is concentrated on many of the messages that I received recently, asking many of the things that we have discussed in the past 5-6 years. A lot of them remember that we talked about the Marcos years and the several issues that were raised. But just to give a background on why we got into this precisely, we began with the Rita Gadi Hour. That was sometime in the last months of 2018, October, thereabouts. And we were thinking that nobody has ever talked about, or at least publicly, has ever talked about the issues against the Marcoses. That those issues have been raised over the past 37 years or so, and they have been repeated in media, in social networking, in the newspapers, everywhere. There are books written about this, plays even, musicals, all zeroing in on three major issues. And so at the time, we thought that perhaps since my experience or the history of which I am involved in revolved around the years of the Ferdinand Edralin Marcos and his first lady Imelda Romualdez Marcos, then that could be a good opportunity to talk about those particular issues that have been raised incessantly, repeatedly, and vehemently at times against the Marcoses. At the time, we were not even sure whether Marcos Jr. would be running for any public office, because we were thinking perhaps he was senator at the time, he would be running for re-election as senator. But then already there were movements that he would be running for the vice presidency in 2019. So we felt that that was about a good opportunity to talk about what it was as far as the Marcoses were concerned, by way of a background to the son, the junior of Ferdinand Edralin Marcos. I am saying this not because I want to go back to what was already discussed 5-6 years ago in another program where I was also hosting, but I'm going back to it because of the requests, several requests. What exactly was it been? And can we be able to gather some of those achievements, if you would call them, or some of those things that were done, or some of the errors of the past that will have to be corrected if they need to be corrected. So that is why I am summarizing that as briefly and as concisely and as pleasantly as we could. So the three issues that came about as far as our earlier presentations were concerned, the program was entitled the Rita Gadi Hour, also every Saturday, an hour or so. And there were three particular items that we discussed alternately and in detail. And in many instances, we also had background documents, etc., that would be able to qualify the things that we were talking about. And of course, always the premise that I emphasized was I was there, I witnessed this, I covered several of these events, I have some of the documents that I'm talking about. Now, what are these three issues? First, of course, the issue of martial law. That has been repeatedly brought about as far as the Marcos years are concerned. They even have branded this with an adjective that those were the dark years, etc. But we must understand at that particular stage in our history why martial law had to be declared. There were a lot of demonstrations, rallies. The NPA was getting pretty strong. There was an assault also at the gates of Malacanang. And then you had the bombing of the Liberal Party, the Liberal Party program they had for the announcement of their candidates. And that was in Plaza Miranda. We are much aware of that in history. Many of you who perhaps would still remember that was a big, really tragic event. And for so many years after what happened, it was being blamed on Marcos. The Liberal Party was the party in opposition to the administration at the time. We must understand that Marcos was in the Nacionalista Party, and it was the Liberal Party that was holding its program at Plaza Miranda. Excuse me. And there were grenades that were thrown. And there were several deaths and many injuries. Injuries also of the senatorial candidates. So because of that, that was September 21. And together with the other events that already culminated with that particular, it was actually like the climax already of all of those violent activities. I'm sorry, that was August 21. So in September 21, Marcos decided to declare martial law to hold together from the center all of the different violent activities that was happening throughout the country. But here again, we have to consider why martial law was declared, as you've said, to be able to hold together all of the different disputes and all of the different criticisms, violent as they are, and of course, the strength and the power of the New People's Army and several of this in Mindanao, which we know in the beginning as the Mindanao Independence Movement, which gave birth to the Moro National Liberation Front and the Mindanao Islamic Front and so forth. So we have both these violent activities from the north in the middle part of our country and then in Mindanao, which is in the south. And that was one reason why peace and order had to be established, and there has to be a very strict kind of a discipline that would be installed in order that there could be peace. Otherwise, talagang magwawarak-warak ang ating bayan. Sabi nga, ang mga komunista kumakatok na sa mga pintuan at ang dami nang nangyayari, marami nang namamatay. And the baseline of this, as President Marcos himself announced, it is also to establish a new society para magkakaroon ng pagbabago, a new society, gathering from our historical records and all of that. So what was it really? Ito yung pinag-usapan na natin ng ilang beses. During martial law, we had the biggest infrastructure projects that were achieved. Ang road network from north to south, our railway system, our airports, seaports, lahat ng mga communication highways na kinakailangan, na-establish lahat yan. And then of course, we had other structures such as tertiary hospitals, all of this. Plus on the political scene, that was the time also that the barangay was just an address. And it was Marcos who made it as the fundamental political unit of our society, which exists up to this day. Yun ang pinaka-baseline ng ating political system. Meron tayong mga cities, meron tayong mga munisipyo, meron mga provinces, mga governorship at lahat na yan. And then yun na nga, ginawa ni Marcos na yung pinaka-maliit na political unit. Hindi na maliit na yun yan. Because before it just, the barangay was just interrelated families, relatives and all. Pero lumaki na yan, pero yan pa rin. Contiguous, in other words, geographically, they are located in certain places. Dati nga sabi, barrio. Barrio yan. And the barrio was just considered an address. So that was also established during martial law. And what is that? That is the grassroots democracy. Kahit na ano pang pintas ang sasabihin, talagang pinakita na kinakailangan hanggang sa mga sitio at sa mga lugar kung nasaan located yung mga barangay na yan, meron silang karapatan din para meron silang self-governance sa kanilang mga lugar. So yun, that was established also during martial law. And the most important of all this was the change in our government system. Doon rin towards the latter part of the 70s, middle part of the latter parts of the 70s, nag-establish at nagtayo si President Marcos ng ating legislative parliament. In other words, tinanggal na yung mga representation sa mga districts na parang magulo na sa iba't ibang mga lugar, kaya ginawa na lang na isa yan, parliament. Wala na yung division ng tinatawag na Senate at saka Congress. Isa na lang yan. Isang legislative branch of government, and that was parliament. Sayang at hindi na pagpatuloy yan sapagkat diyan sa parliament na yan nakita natin na talagang na-streamline lahat ng mga kinakailangan as far as legislation and legislative matters are concerned. Wala yung mga pork barrel, yung mga pidaf-pidaf. Ang trabaho nila talagang gumawa lang ng batas. Tingnan yung mga batas na kailangan ayusin, palitan, i-amenda, o kaya dagdagan pa, whatever it is. That was parliament. Pero nawala na yan nung dumating nga si Mrs. Aquino noong 86. But that was one of the results also of martial law. And then, as far as our foreign policy is concerned, it was also during that time, huwag nating kalimutan yan, during martial law, na nagbukas tayo ng ating diplomatic relations. Kasi ang mundo noon, pagkatapos nga na nangyari sa Second World War, naghati na ang mundo between the countries that are aligned with democracy, kagaya ng United States of America, Britain, and all the other allies, at ang kalahati yung mga kasama naman ng the people sa Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Kaya nakita natin yung sinasabi nga diametrically opposed yung dalawang ideological systems na yan. Merong mga bansa na komunista, socialist, at may mga bansa na demokrasya. But what happened during that period of martial law? President Marcos decided to open diplomatic relations with those known as communist countries. Parang sinasabi na kung talagang pag-uusapan ang ibig sabihin ng independent foreign policy, doon pinakita ni President Ferdinand Edelin Marcos that we really could stand on our own independent foreign policy by opening, so to speak, figuratively, opening the Iron Curtain, which is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, yan ang Russia, the Russian Federation today, and opening the Bamboo Curtain, which is the People's Republic of China, and then lifting the veils of the Middle Eastern Islamic countries. Kaya yan lahat na accomplish ng martial law. Kaya pagka pinipintasan yung period na yan ng martial law, 11 years of martial law, kailangan tingnan natin kung ano ang mga nagawa, ano ang mga na-accomplish. Lahat ng yan ay nakita natin. Pati yung ating sa agricultural sector na napakahalaga para sa ating mga kinakailangang pagkain sa araw-araw for the wellness and the well-being and the nutrition of our people. Talagang binigyan pansin at binigyan diin at inasikaso yung agricultural productivity to the extent that hindi lang basta nakakaani tayo ng marami, ngunit kagaya nga ng bigas na yan ang ating staple food because we are a rice dependent people, we were able to export even rice. So those were the accomplishments that were undertaken during that period of martial law. Na isagawa yan sapagkat mas simple na ang papalakad ng pamahalaan, na control na rin yung mga kriminalidad, hindi na pwedeng magdadala ng mga armas, hindi kagaya noon, yung mga pumupunta sa mga restaurant, kumakain kung sa iba't ibang lugar, nanonood ng sine, o kaya sa mga nightclub, at lahat ng yan, may mga dalang armas, may dalang baril. Pag nagkakaroon ng eleksyon, ganun din, patayan at lahat. Pinagbabawal na lahat yan ng panahon na yon. At yun na nga ang mahalaga dyan, kaya natin natalaka yan sapagkat isa yan sa mga issue na paulit-ulit na nilalabas laban kay Pangulong Ferdinand Edelin Marcos. And then of course, we have to give credit to the First Lady. I mentioned our independent foreign policy during the time, and it was she that was tasked by President Marcos to go to these countries that were, as I've said, ideologically, politically, um, demographically opposite our democratic way of life. So yan, siya ang unang-unang pumunta sa Moscow at saka nagbigay ng first meeting sa mga opisyal sa Moscow, leading on to the state visit of President Marcos and the opening of our diplomatic relations with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. Ganon din ang kanyang ginawa sa People's Republic of China. At nakita naman natin ito nung nakaraang mga television, nakita nung pinalabas sa television, sa mga pahayagan yung kanilang retrato. Yung unang-unang meeting niya kay Chairman Mao Zedong sa China, kasama niya si Junior Marcos noon. That was the first meeting that she had, again, as I've said, as a precursor and the opening eventually of our diplomatic relations with China. Nagkaroon nga ng isang magandang documentary tungkol dyan. Meron tayong libro na tinatawag na 10 Days of September. 10 araw ng September ng taon na yon, na naikot niya yung mga magagandang lugar kung saan napag-aralan din ng ating mga kasamang mga opisyales noon, yung kanilang mga agricultural programs at lahat ng kanilang mga isinasagawa. Sapagkat yun na nga ang kanilang they were just beginning to develop, but already they had the different programs for agricultural productivity. Kaya yun ang magandang isang halimbawa. That is the review that we are actually doing now and what we have talked about over the past 6 years. So yun ang mga naisagawa at yun ang sabi ko, si Mrs. Marcos ang nanguna dyan sa pagpasok sa mga bansa na yan. Then of course, we were having great problem. Ang nangyari pala, sabi ko nga, kaya nga nag-martial law, gawa nga yung mga NPA at lahat na yan, isang ang malaking barko, naalala niyo yung Karagatan incident kung saan mga armas na nasa pangalan ni Jose Maria Sison, naglanding dito sa atin para gagamitin nga nitong mga rebelde. Yun ay na-discover at nahuli yun. Ngunit, nung nagbukas tayo ng diplomatic relations sa China, tumigil na rin ng suporta ang People's Republic of China dito sa mga tinatawag ng mga rebelde at mga grupo na yan na nagpapadala ng mga armas. So you could see how important it was at that particular stage of our history. Kagaya rin na nangyari sa Mindanao, nagkaroon doon ng independence movement. And the independence movement was heavily supported by a number of Islamic countries, pero one of the biggest supporters actually was Libya, the Jamahiriya Republic of Libya. And it was Colonel Gaddafi who was the head of Libya. And because of the fact that he was part of the Islamic conference where Nur Miswari was talking about genocide that was happening in Mindanao, kaya yan, naisip niya na tulungan yung mga brother Muslims niya sa Mindanao. So the independence movement, MNLF, MILF are being supported heavily, not only by other Islamic countries, but heavily logistically and of course spiritually, morally by Libya. And it was the First Lady that was sent by President Marcos to meet with Colonel Gaddafi to be able to thresh out that he should stop supporting this independence movement and to understand that we can live in peace and in a good community and a better autonomous manner in Southern Philippines. Kaya ang natapos dun sa kanilang usapan after several meetings that we've gone back to Libya several times, nag-usap din sa long distance sa telepono si Colonel Gaddafi at si President Marcos, and they threshed out ano ang mga magandang ilalagay sa isang agreement between all of these factions na gusto nilang maging independent from the Republic of the Philippines. And that is where we formulated, our government together with the government of Libya formulated what is known as the Tripoli Agreement. It is there where we had, for instance, the two regions in Southern Philippines, regions 9 and regions 12 together, Muslims, Christians, and other tribes, not separating them by religion or by culture, but all together to have their own autonomous region short of an independence movement. Why is it such that it was so important in such a manner? Alam mo kasi dun sa Mindanao, kaming mga taga Mindanao, madalas nga, ang tawag nga namin sa Maynila, ang central government, gobyerno sa rawang tao. It's like a government of a foreign people because development programs and a lot of assistance that ought to go to Mindanao was actually not running smoothly. So there was a necessity to have its own system of administration and management of government resources. Kaya yan dalawang autonomous regions na yan, 9 and 12. As a matter of fact, the independence movement wanted even Palawan to be included. Parang Minsupala nga ang tawag doon. Mindanao, Sulu, and Palawan. But then there was a plebiscite that was held. Even Davao was part of it, part of the demand that they had. So nagkaroon ng plebisito yan. Kaya as a result of the plebiscite, ang nagsama na lang at ang naiwan ay ang the 10 provinces and 5 cities within regions 9 and region 12. Why am I talking like this as though, it was just yesterday? Well, it so happened that we covered, Channel 4, the government television station, covered the plebiscite and the referendum that happened in those cities, so that the formation of the 2 autonomous regions of 9 and 12, including the 5 cities, was formally established after the results unanimously of the plebiscite and the referendum in these 2 regions. At sayang, hindi na pagpatuloy ang Tripoli Agreement na yan sapagkat that was formalized in 1976. Kaya simula ng 76 hanggang 1986, there was peace in Mindanao. At lahat ng mga kinakailangan na tulong at mga programa na ibibigay doon ay naisagawa. For instance, perhaps for the first time, the madrasa schools kung saan tinuturo ang Arabic at saka ang Quran ay tinalaga dito sa mga lugar na yan. Nagkaroon din ng Amana Bank, which is a bank also catering to the Muslims and those who wanted to invest from other foreign Muslim countries, because yun ang kagandahan kasi wala silang interest eh. Wala sila ng mga ibang mga requirements na the usual financial system required. So nagkaroon ng Amana Bank, and then of course there was the Mindanao Development Authority, which was also headed by somebody who could really manage and administer several of the projects that were needed in the island of Mindanao. So hindi lang sa Region 9 and 12, but also for the entire Mindanao Island. Yun ang mahalaga na na-accomplish during that time. Kaya importante na maintindihan natin to sapagkat sabi ko nga, since October of 2018 until 2019 and all the way until just recently, we have been talking about this. Yan ang martial law. Yung isa naman na pinag-usapan natin dun sa sinasabi kong Rita Gadi Hour, yung tungkol sa mga human rights violations. Ano ba nangyari dito? Parang pinalabas na napakasamang tao ni Ferdinand Edralin Marcos. Ang sabi nila, 10,000 people in the period of 20 years of his administration, mga pinatay, mga tinorture at lahat ng yan. Lumabas yan sapagkat doon siya na-exile sa Honolulu. While he was there in Honolulu, you must remember he was not a resident of Honolulu. Ang binigay sa kanila, sa mga Marcoses, yung parole visa. Parang temporary lang yon. And they had to report to the Immigration Department of the United States of America regularly para sinasabi nga hindi sila lalabas ng Amerika. Para talagang hindi lang in exile, but they were really like prisoners. Hawak sila ng mga Amerikano. So anong nangyari? When Marcos was in Honolulu, merong nakaisip doon na siguro pagkakataon na ito na mag-file tayo ng kaso laban kay Marcos habang andito siya sa Amerika. And that is that he violated the human rights of, there are 4 individuals actually, 4 na kaso lang yan. Si Hilaw, si Ortigas, Jose Maria Sison, yan, 4 sila. Yung isa nga ay the heirs of this the complainants were the heirs of somebody who was killed in a labor dispute in a cannery in Alaska. At parang pinalabas na pinapatay siya ni Marcos in a labor dispute of which absolutely had nothing to do with Philippine laws, but something to do with unions and all of these strikes that they had in the cannery in Alaska. But be that as it may, nangunguna na nag-file ng human rights complaint against Marcos. Tandaan niyo, si Jose Maria Sison, siya yung head ng Communist Party of the Philippines. Kinulong na yan ni Marcos sa Pilipinas, pinakawalan ni Mrs. Aquino, lumipad sa Netherlands. At even though nasa Netherlands siya, alam niya si Marcos nasa Honolulu. That's when kasama nung 4 na mga individuals ay yung kanilang mga anak o mga kamag-anak ay nag-file sila ng kaso laban kay Ferdinand Edralin Marcos for human rights violation within that period of 20 years. Ang malungkot dito ay that filing of that complaint is a violation even of American law sapagkat ayon sa batas ng Amerika, kinakailangan kung human rights violation yan doon sa country of origin. In other words, dito sa Pilipinas kailangan litisin yung mga sinasabi nila na ang kanilang human rights ay na-violate. Pangalawa, si Marcos is not a resident of Honolulu. Sabi ko nga, parole visa lang yan. Wala rin karapatan na papasok ang jurisdiction ng American courts. At pangatlo, yung mga kaso na yan na final, yung 4 na kaso na yan na final sa Honolulu, na-dismiss na mismo sa trial court sa Honolulu. Yung kanilang Judge Fong ang nag-dismiss niyan at sinabi, number 1, there is the act of state doctrine na kanilang nilabas. And this means that there is the independence of the Republic of the Philippines as a sovereign country. Kaya kinakailangan hindi yan lilitisin ng Amerika as another sovereign country. Kinakailangan, as I've already emphasized, that you respect the sovereignty of the Philippines and have whatever crimes a former president or a president in exile may have committed should be tried in the country of origin. So it was dismissed. But what happened? Ay nakialam na naman ang State Department ng Amerika, and yun na nga ang sabi doon. Well, we have to cater to Mrs. Aquino's wishes na kailangan to mga Marcos litisin dito sa Amerika. Kaya yung human rights cases na yan, kailangan buksan ulit at i-file ulit. Ang nangyari, inalis na dyan sa Honolulu at binigay doon kay Judge Real. Although Judge Real is one of the judges in, anong tawag nito, sa LA, he also has jurisdiction over the case in Honolulu. So yun ang nangyari. In addition to that, sabi ng mga abogado, yung si abogado ng mga human rights claimants, si Robert Swift, sabi niya, bakit 4 lang na individuals ang magpa-file ng complaint against the Marcoses? Alam naman ng mundo, at yan ang pinag-uusapan, marami silang pera, mayaman sila. So bakit 4 lang? Dagdagan natin. So sabi ng judge, sige, okay, maghanap pa kayo kung sinong pwedeng isali. You must remember that originally 4 lang yan. Okay, so this Robert Swift, the lawyer of those claimants, came here to the Philippines, and reputedly he set up a desk in Cubao, sa farmers market daw, in Cebu, in Davao City, sa Bangkerohan, kung saan yun ang bagsakan ng mga agricultural products at doon nagko-convert yung mga tao. At yun na nga, meron siyang nilagay doon na lahat kayo na nagkaroon ng human rights violation na ginawa nung panahon ni Marcos, pumirma kayo dito. So yun, maraming nagpirma, maraming sari-sari pangalan nga ang kanilang sinulat. Yung iba hindi naman totoong pangalan nila. Ngunit sabi nga ng judge, there is a deadline already. Hindi na pwedeng tumagal pa na nag-iintay ang decision tungkol dyan. So all of media, both in television and in the newspapers, and this is almost all over the world, ang sinasabi, 10,000 daw yung human rights victims ni President Marcos. But if you look at the case in Honolulu, yung mga dinagdag nila doon sa originally na 4 ay umabot lang sa 3,000 plus, 3,840 as a matter of fact. So hindi tama yung sinasabi na 10,000 lahat na yan. In truth, mga 3,000 lang na mga pangalan. At yung iba nga, kung iyong susuriin, ay yung iba ay nasa order of battle, mga rebelde na na namatay na napatay na mga sundalo o sa mga encounter. Yung mga iba talagang niloko lang nila yung pangalan nila. And it cannot be a class suit. In other words, hindi pwedeng sabay-sabay sila na sinaktan ni Marcos o pinatay ni Marcos. Sabi nga nung isa sa mga top civil lawyers ng Amerika, si Mark Lane, nakausap ko siya sa long distance at sabi niya, Rita, if it's a class suit, then this 10,000 people that they claim had human rights violations done against them should have been laid out in the highway perhaps, and Marcos with the road roller run over them. Some died, some got injured. Yun ang class suit, sabay-sabay sila nasaktan o namatay. O kaya, kinarga sila sa isang barko at nilubog yung barko na yon. So may mga namatay, may mga nalunod, may mga nagkaroon ng mga injuries. That is a class suit. But if you try to spread it out in 20 years of the Marcos administration, you cannot do that. Hindi na yan class suit. Iba-iba na yan. At hindi mo na masasort out. And of course, the most important there is walang medical records. Walang magpapakitang magte-testify na ito ang nangyari. Ganito siya namatay. Marami nagsabi na, ay nako, one of them, as a matter of fact, became a senator, and the senator said, my brother, yung kapatid ko, dinurog yung ulo dun sa preso, something like that anyway. So yun na nga sasabihin, why did Marcos go down inside the prison cell to bang the head of your brother? So it has to be a direct act because we also adhere to the Nuremberg trial yung nangyari after the Second World War against the generals and the soldiers and the officials and the officers of Hitler's military. Yung kanyang Nazi, yung kanyang SS, lahat na yan. They filed cases also against them. And hindi nila magagamit na sasabihin na inutos sa kanila or it is command responsibility or Hitler was the one who told them to execute those torturous acts, etc. Because of the Nuremberg trial, it is the accountability of the person directly inflicting the torture. Yun ang mahalaga doon. So we adhere to that. And so again, with the trial that was happening in the court of Judge Real of L8, hindi pwedeng sabihin na si Marcos ang gumawa niyan o naglitis niyan sapagkat, again, under international law, we accept the dictum and the provisions of the law which is internationally accepted. So yan ang martial law na madalas lumalabas, iniikot. Magandang pag-usapan sa kasalukuyan yan sapagkat ngayon, meron parang ano ba tawag dito? There's a seesaw that's happening whether the International Criminal Court of Justice, which is stationed in The Hague, incidentally, it is not a United Nations branch, although they had a Rome statute. They several countries, I think about 54 countries, signed what they call as the statute in Rome or the Rome statute, and they said that the International Criminal Court can be able to look into human rights violations, genocide, torture, or other atrocious activities that are undertaken by governments or government leaders, and that can be tried by the International Court of Justice. But America, China, Russia, the other big countries are not signatories to this. Ang nangyari dyan ay, noong panahon ni President Duterte, hindi nga tayo, umalis na nga tayo dyan sa pagsula yan sa Roman statute na yan. Ngunit ngayon sa kasalukuyan parang bumabalik na naman. Umiikot-ikot ngayon sapagkat gusto nila litisin naman si President Duterte tungkol sa mga supposedly again human rights violations during his term. So makita ninyo, these are the things that we are reviewing actually, which have some relevance also to the things that are happening presently. I talked about martial law and the different institutions that were established, which sana, hopefully, we can be able to push through with the amendments or a new constitution, which is a legislative branch known as the parliament, a federal system of government, which even President Marcos Jr. has acknowledged by having his his party when he ran for the presidency as the Federal Party of the Philippines. What does it mean? Federal. Ang ibig sabihin, magkakaroon ng division ang ating mga probinsya, maybe perhaps 3 or 4 provinces in one federal government, para sila independent na sa centralized control ng whatever activities are needed for the federal regions, with the exception, of course, sabi nga, with the exception of the armed forces, with the exception of foreign policy, with the exception of currency, yung pera and all, yung pagpiprint na pera, and of course foreign investment, sila na rin yan, with the approval of the central government, kasi the NEDA will still be in control of the National Economic Development Authority. So there you have it, that all of this that already were in the past, which we have talked about since 2018, could have some relevance also with what we are doing now or can be done now for our future. Because over the past recent years, there have been a lot of, not only a lot, but there already was an established group of people during the time of President Duterte, and this was headed by former Justice Puno, and he went all over the country precisely with a group of other constitutional experts and other lawyers all over the country, explaining how the new constitution would be able to take into consideration a federal form of government and a parliamentary system, together with other amendments, one of which is very crucial, which is the justice system that we have. So, dyan natin makikita, we are reviewing what was done, 38, almost 40 years ago, during the time of President Adelin Marcos, and its relevance now. Kaya reviewing and remembering. Hindi lang basta binabalikan niya nakaraan, sapagkat sabi ko nga, napag-usapan ko na ito ng paulit-ulit over the past years. All of this that are issues that are raised against the father of our president, of our current president, but which of course will have relevance to what is happening today. So that is where the human rights cases evolved. So ano ang situation ngayon? Well, they tried to claim alleged Marcos assets in Switzerland, but Switzerland has a law that they will not grant human rights cases and compensation for human rights violations according to the law. Otherwise, naku, lahat ng mga Hudyo pupunta sa Switzerland para magke-claim whatever it is that they can claim. Anyway, so ganun din ang nangyayari sa iba't ibang mga lugar, sapagkat maraming mga nagko-complain na sinasabi, anong pinag-uusapan natin na human rights? Sapagkat kung titingnan natin, ilang beses ba ang United States of America pumasok sa mga bansa, anong karapatan ang kanilang pagpasok dyan? Just because they have a different political ideology? You will remember the Vietnam War. You will remember yung pagpasok nila sa Syria. Sinasabi na because andyan yung mga terrorists ng mga ISIS na gusto mag-establish ng caliphate. Yung pagpasok nila sa Iran, pagpasok nila sa Iraq, pagpasok nila sa Libya, pagpasok nila sa mga iba't ibang mga bansa sa Africa, lahat ng yan. Yung kanilang pag-capture kay Noriega sa Panama Canal, sa Panama. Can you imagine how that was done? December 16, I will remember that nung hinahanap nila si Noriega na nagtago sa isang embassy sa Panama, sapagkat at the end of that month of December, yung Panama Canal, ita-turn over na yan sa Panama, to the government of Panama. And yun na nga, nagkagulo. So you could see, there are a lot of human rights violations done by powerful countries, and yet, hindi naman sila hinahabol ng, ang tawag nito, ng Criminal Court of Justice that is stationed in The Hague in the Netherlands. We're talking about this because nga may mga connection, or at least there is some traces of synchronicity, so to speak. Sapagkat ngayon, ginagamit yan laban kay former President Duterte, sapagkat si President Duterte naman, sangkatutak naman ang pagpintas niya sa nangyayari sa Kongreso. At bakit naman siya nagsasalita ng ganyan laban sa Kongreso? Sapagkat parang sinasaktan din yung kanyang anak, who is the Vice President, Miss Sara Duterte. sinasabi na ang laki-laki ng kanyang confidential funds, etc. She has to explain until she gave it up. Sabi niya, no fuss, you can have it. I'm returning it. Let's not argue about it. But of course, the daddy, Papa Duterte is irritated by this because bakit nga gaganunin ng anak niya? So there's this seesaw thing. Meanwhile, they're threatening Duterte with the ICC, the International Criminal Court of Justice. Sana papasukin na yan dito, although President Marcos has announced that we have already removed ourselves from the ICC. And so ano ba yan? Pababalikin ba yan? O ano? It's still a matter of conjecture. And of course, as the President himself said, pinag-aaralan pa. How long will the study take? Will it be tomorrow that there will be a decision? Will it take several months? Will it extend until the end of his term that it's still being studied? You need a lot of jurisprudence on this. You need a lot of experts that will undertake the studies on this. But already, even his own sister, Senator Amy, has already spoken about how important it is that we maintain our judicial system the way it is and let not any other judicial system interfere with our courts the way the ICC will be coming in to do investigation and to do a trial on human rights violations. Ang sabi nga, tayong mga nag-aaral ng law, ang unang-unang na pinapamemorya sa atin, the first act of sovereignty is the independence of our courts. Di ba? Ano ibig sabihin yan? Ibig sabihin niya, walang pwedeng maghimasok dito sapagkat tayo ang mismo ang maglilitis ng mga kriminal dito sa atin, ang mga pagkakasala ng mga tao dito sa atin, tayo na rin ang magsasagawa. Sana nga, mapatupad ng tuloy-tuloy yan sapagkat marami ring nakakawala na hindi na ito nalilitis. But that has nothing to do at all with any foreign court coming in to do its own investigation or its own trial or its own strategies insofar as all of this so-called human rights violations are concerned. So there you have the review that we're undertaking now today, the review that we have done in the past 6 years prior to the candidacy of President Marcos Jr. for the presidency. Lahat yan ay napag-usapan natin really in detail over and over, as carefully and as exactly as we could present it together with the documents that we have, sapagkat hawak din natin yung mga testimony sa court, halimbawa dyan sa court ni Judge Fogg na nag-dismiss nung human rights case, at yung case din na tungkol dito sa human rights violation na 10,000 daw, pero 3,000 lang ang nakaregister dun sa court ni Judge Manuel Rial. So there you have that other issue which was raised. And then the third also, which is very, very critical, which up to today, pinag-uusapan pa rin, yung yaman ni President Marcos na siguro mga anak niya, namana na yan sa kasalukuyan or it's out there still somewhere hidden, or it is still unexplained, or they've already partitioned this, we don't know. All we know is that there were documents that were sorted out that they obtained from their scavenging Malacanang after the Marcoses left, and then of course the memorandum of agreement that the Justice Department of America had with the Swiss government. This is between what's her name now? Solicitor General Tenzing of America and also one of the officials of the Swiss government. They had some kind of an agreement that whatever alleged money or assets that the Marcoses may have in Switzerland will have to be frozen and will have to be sequestered by the Philippine government until it is proven that those assets and those monies have been stolen from the Filipino people. So yun ang bone of contention. Yung mga pera na yan, yung mga assets na yan, ninakaw ba yan sa taong bayan? So ang nangyari dito, sapagkat si President Marcos at the time when this case against the Marcos wealth was passed, wala silang makitang batas sa Amerika na pwedeng litisin yan. Ang ginamit nila na batas ay yung batas para sa mga sindikato ng mga kriminal. They call it the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization Act. RICO ang acronym niyan. Anong ibig sabihin niyan? Yung author mismo niya, na professor of law in Notre Dame, na-interview ko rin yan, ang sabi nga niya, sapagkat nung panahon talaga na ang Amerika ay nagsisimula pa lang na umunlad, talagang napakalaki na ng mga sindikato at ng mafia style ng underworld. Sila ang mga smugglers, sila ang may hawak ng mga nightclub, ng prostitution, ng drugs, lahat yan ng mga criminal activities. That is the mafiosi style. May mga foreigners dyan, sabi nga, in the beginning it was Sicilian, Italian, Korean, whatever it is, kung ano man nationality. And then of course, the Americans themselves. Meron silang mga mafia-style organizations. Kaya, yung batas na yan, uulitin ko, racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization. Ibig sabihin yung organization na yan corrupt at racketeering. Ano ibig sabihin ng racketeering na yan? Yun na lang, descriptive na talaga na talagang talagang anomalous at illegitimate, illicit ang trabaho niyan. Can you imagine that they pictured the government of Ferdinand Edralin Marcos as a racketeering influenced corrupt organization sapagkat yan ang batas na sinabi nila na na-violate ni President Marcos. Hindi siya nakapunta ng New York for the trial sapagkat nagwi-weekend na yung kanyang health. For health reasons, he could not travel. So si Mrs. Marcos ang na-indict. But during that period, between the indictment and the trial proper, 1989, namatay si President Marcos. Kaya nung namatay si President Marcos, eto na, dumating na yung mga taga-Justice Department sa Hawaii, kinausap si Mrs. Marcos at sinabi sa kanya, pwede na natin asikasuhin yung kaso mo kasi namatay ng asawa mo, mag-plea bargain ka na lang. Tanggapin mo na meron kang crime na na-commit, parang imbes na 1 million ang ninakaw mo, sabihin mo na lang na 100,000 ang ninakaw mo, tapos absuelto ka na. Sabi ni Mrs. Marcos, no, I will go to trial. Because to steal even $1 means that we stole. Hindi kami nagnakaw. So, ayan ang mga nangyari dyan. Kaya, nilitis ngayon siya sa New York. She had to go to New York because that was where the trial was about. Bakit naman sa New York? Sapagkat merong 4 na gusali doon. 2 of the biggest real estate buildings. Binili nung panahon nila at yan ang sinasabi na binili ng pera na ninakaw sa taong bayan. So, yung Crown Building, tapos yung lahat na yan, nabanggit ko na rin yan. Kaya sa New York isinagawa sapagkat yun ang pinapakita nila na ebidensya na nagnakaw si Marcos ng pera ng taong bayan at binili yung properties na yan. They're not even talking about whatever is in other banks, etc. located because meron na silang ginawa na money trail. In other words, they made a chart which they showed in court, and this is public knowledge because we saw this and we have a copy of this. They showed the flow of money, that from the Swiss accounts, some monies were brought to LA, from LA to New York, and from New York to buy those 4 buildings. So that's the money trail. But they were not able to show saan nanggaling yung pera na pumasok sa Swiss accounts. Wala silang makita na ebidensya na yung pera sa Swiss accounts ay nanggaling dito sa taong bayan, nanggaling sa National Treasury, nanggaling sa taxes ng mga tao, o didakaw sa mga tao. Wala. They had 95 witnesses. Not one witness could testify that there was money or even 1 single cent that was stolen from the Filipino people. And then, of course, they had also 350,000 pages of documents na dinala sa court para ipakita, eto lahat yung mga money placements, eto yung mga accounts. Ang dami nila mga testimonies, yung bank teller, yung cashier, lahat ng manager, yung finance officer. Pero walang makapagsalita ni isa sa kanila na magsasabi, ninakaw yan sa taong bayan o sa bayan o sa Pilipinas, sa mga Pilipino. Kaya, na-absuelto. Unanimous decision, not guilty. What does it mean? hindi dinakaw yung pera na ginamit para bilihin yung mga buildings na yon. Hanggang sa kasalukuyan, parati pa rin pinagbibintangan nga na nagnakaw ng pera. Ngunit that is why we keep on saying that there still has to be somebody or some document that will surface to show that there was something taken from the Philippine National Treasury or the Central Bank of the Philippines or the budget of the Philippines that went into the assets and the accounts of Ferdinand Marcos. We are reviewing this only for the sake of answering all of those that have sent messages to me recently, and they wanted to know exactly again what can we do as far as reviewing all of this is concerned and what is there for us to gather from all of that. Well, sa kasalukuyan, yan pa rin ang pinag-uusapan. Ngunit sabi nga, pinalitan nga yung pangalan na eh. Pinalitan na yung pangalan ng mga foreign investments para makatulong sa ating pamahalaan. Tinawag na nga Maharlika Investment Fund. Yan ba ay magagaling sa mga pera ng mga Marcoses? Hindi natin alam. Sapagkat wala talagang makapapakita na meron pang natitira dyan sa mga accounts na yan o dyan sa mga bangko na yan o dyan sa mga placements na yan. Sapagkat lahat ng kanilang nilista ng mga foundations na andun sa Switzerland na may mga laman na pera, sinabi ng Swiss government and Swiss Federal Court, hindi lang Swiss government, the court itself of Switzerland, sinabi sa Pilipinas at sa Amerika, o eto, magkano yan? Yung unang pasok niyan, ilan lang yan, mga $100 million, lumaki na ng lumaki sapagkat lumaki na rin yung interest. So, at that particular point, ng panahon nito ng President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, noong nagdesisyon ang Swiss Federal Court na sinabi, yung $780 million na yan ay ibabalik na namin sa inyo sa Pilipinas. Huwag mo na kami guluhin dito. Huwag mo nang halungkatin yung mga bangko namin. We're turning it over to you. You could sequester it, hold it, until you can prove to yourselves that that money is stolen. Kayo na ang mag-disperse na yan according to the process of law. Kailangan talaga merong due process. Pero wala naman tayong bangko na makakatanggap ng ganong kalaking halaga at the time. Kaya diniposito muna yon sa Singapore. But what happened was in time, in several trenches, nadala na rin dito sa Pilipinas, binalik na rin. But there was no trial anymore. Wala nang due process na isinagawa para sabihin na yung pera na yan ay ninakaw sa taong bayan. Ang nangyari ay nagkaroon na lang under Chief Justice Renato Corona, nagkaroon ng summary judgment. According to Philippine law, tama naman yung kanyang batas na ginamit na nagsasabi, kung ganyang kalaki lang ang sweldo mo, ngunit ganito kalaki yung assets mo, at hindi mo kayang ipatunay o explain kung paano ganun kalaki yung pera mo sa bangko kumpara doon sa sweldo mo, ay may karapatan ang pamahalaan na kunin yung pera na yan para yan ang ipamudmod sa taong bayan. Pero hindi yan pamumudmod sapagkat meron din batas si Corazon Aquino na nagsasabi, whatever is sequestered from the Marcoses or obtained by due process from the Marcoses should be turned over to the Agrarian Reform Program. So hindi basta pamibigay sa tao, ilalagay sa Agrarian Reform Program. That is what happened to yung unexplained wealth na yan. And that was during the time of Mrs. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo when she was president. So, nalipat na dito sa Pilipinas, nagkaroon na ng summary judgment, yung pera na yan, pumasok na dito sa atin. Anong ginawa sa pera? Ay ginamit nga, according to the records, sa Agrarian Reform Program. But, hindi maganda ang pagkagamit. Kasi ang lumabas ay hindi pala sa Agrarian Reform Program talaga pupunta. Dinaya ang paglabas ng pera na yon. Nag-certify na nagbigay ng mga fertilizer, nag-certify na nagbigay ng mga insecticides, nag-certify na ganitong mga gamit ang binigay sa agrikultura. Pero ang mga pumirma, hindi farmers. mga driver, mga katulong, mga kamag-anak, mga sekretary, ni Napoles. Kaya hanggang sa kasalukuyan, ayan, si Napoles nakakulong pa hanggang ngayon. At kahit na ang testimony niya, sinabi niya, tinuruan siya nung Secretary of Budget at the time kung anong gagawin at ginawa niya. Pero siya ang nakulong. Precisely because na nakita na yung mga recipients ng pera na yan ay hindi talaga pumunta sa agrarian reform program, hindi pumunta sa mga farmers. So that's the unexplained wealth, which up to this day is unexplained, and we still have an unexplainable way of looking at how this is all happening. Yan ang tatlong issues na sinasabi ko nga na pinag-usapan natin since 2018 hanggang sa nung tatakbo na si uh, uh, Marcos Jr. for the presidency, itong 2022. So for 6 years, every week, every hour, yan ang pinag-uusapan natin. Kaya ang mahalaga dito ay ano ang kabuluhan ng lahat ng yan. Our government now is about a year or so old. At lahat ng mga programang nakikita natin ay wag na natin, let us not compare anymore to what happened during the time of his father. This is a new administration. This is a young man. He has his own ideology as far as his administration is concerned. He has his own programs of government and the management of the economy, including what he can do as far as agricultural productivity is concerned. The only reason we are doing some interconnection is to show that at one time in our past, the father of our president now had all of these issues already answered in many ways, including all the accomplishments that are done. And we look forward now to this. Well, I could still say it's a new administration that heretofore we can have already the impetus and perhaps the direction that we are seeing in many of the programs that the government is presently undertaking. Just recently, he has come to the meeting that he had with the ASEAN and several other countries in Los Angeles and in San Francisco. And according to several officials, this is still one of the best of his foreign travels, because prior to that, he has met with other, not just government officials or heads of state, but also with business leaders and other heads of conglomerates, etc., for them to come and invest in our country. But this trip that he had in Los Angeles, according to the summary that was presented by the president himself, there were really concrete pledges now for several investment projects, not only for information technology, for pharmaceuticals, for health and wellness, for several others. I have a whole listing there, which perhaps at some time we will also be detailing, which I already have, in fact, in many ways. But that is the way our history moves. From one generation 40 years ago to this generation that we have today. It's a new way of looking at how the future would be. And so it is not just a 2025 that we are thinking of the elections for the local government officials and for the members of Congress, but we also have to look at 2028 when there will be an exactly different change of leadership sometime 2028. As one of my friends would say, Bono Adaza is one of my partners that would come every once in a while to discuss with us the current events, and he would say that we could be as old as Methuselah, one of the oldest in the Old Testament, the grandfather even of Noah. So you can imagine that we hope to live to see the horizon in 2028. But right now, this is the concern that our people have. We are assured by the words and the statements made by our President Marcos Jr. saying that the economy is well on track, that we have investments coming in, that our health and agriculture are both taken care of, that we are aligning now with several of the modernization of information technology. Perhaps even artificial intelligence could be utilized for our disaster risk reduction programs, including climate change, etc., and all of this. So all of these things would be interrelated. This is the review that we have undertaken for 6 years, and which I have summarized as briefly as I could, if you understood exactly what I was talking about. And of course, the relevance it would have with our lives today, plus, of course, remembering. And that is very important. For there are things in the past which we really must remember in order that we can gather enough strength and enough will and enough initiative to rise to the challenge of the day. As another good friend would say, all of us have the capacity and the capability to be great. There is a greatness within every individual. But first, we have to learn that it is not just our physical aspects or our mental aspects, but it is also the education of our spirits, the education of our soul. Let us try to bring back ourselves to God, to bring our humanity closer to the spiritual essence of our lives, because that is what is of greatest value. So again, I'd like to thank all of you for having joined us, and perhaps a prayer again that we give this day to the Lord, the fruits of all our labor and the desires of our hearts, so that in His hands we place all our questions and all our burdens we lay on His shoulders. Let us pray for our loved ones, for everyone, and for ourselves. May we return to the true meaning of love, love for one another. May our minds be healed, may we all be blessed, and may we find our way back to the Lord, our souls also back to spirituality, so that we may be able to have peace in our families, in our homes, in our barangays, in our country, and in the world. From fear to faith, from pain to peace, and from suffering to joy. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Thank you for having joined me. This is Rita Gadi for the Chronicles.